Right, now, shall we make a start? So, hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to this slow fashion afternoon, which is being held as part of Greenbuild, a 2-week-long event which North Norfolk District Council are hosting to run in tandem with the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which is currently being held in Glasgow, COP26. The online Greenbuild event this year has set out to explore a wide range of climate change and environmental topics with the hope of provoking greater awareness of the issues that we all face, but also to try and inch a little bit closer to those solutions to a sustainable, brighter and greener future for us all. My name is Annie Samazi, and I'm the Climate Change and Environmental Policy Manager at North Norfolk District Council, and I'll be hosting the event today. My colleague Nige will also be on hand to help with any digital aspects of hosting, such as assisting with the chat bar and live polls, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this event, and this is so that we can share it online afterwards. Throughout the whole of today, your cameras and microphones will be automatically muted and turned off. Despite this, there will be opportunities for you to interact with us, and we'll let you know how and when you can do this. So just to check that you're out there and that you can hear me, I'm going to pop a couple of questions up onto the screens now, which you can answer. And please don't worry, your answers are all going to be anonymous. So the first question, just a nice easy one there. So what is the weather like where you are today? So it's a lovely sunny afternoon, wild and blustery, pouring down, grey and cloudy. Brilliant. So we've got lots of answers coming in. So Nigel, are you able to post the results for that one? Okay, so it looks like, well, not great for anyone really out there, wild and blustery and grey and cloudy. And next question, please, Nige. So shopping poll. So would you consider buying secondhand clothes? So yes, I do this all the time. Yes, I do this occasionally. No, but I would consider doing so. And no, I prefer to buy new clothes. And again, answers are already coming in. Brilliant. I think that looks like most people have answered that already. And the results are that most people do seem to buy secondhand clothes all the time, which is brilliant. And I'm sure we can find out more about that later on in the session. So great. So later on, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters, and you can do this by typing questions into the Q&A bar, which is situated at the bottom of the screen on the control panel. You can send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we'll then collect these and address them during the Q&A session, which will be at the end of each speaker's presentation. We won't get round to answering the questions before the Q&A sessions commence. If you do want to use the chat bar at all during the session, then you can. The chat can be viewed by everyone. So we do just ask that you're respectful in any comments that you put in, and mindful that, of course, Greenbuild is a family-friendly event. My colleague Nige will be on hand to field any quick clarifications that you might have or comments. So please feel free to use the chat function if you wish to. And just again, to check that it's working, you can briefly type into it now your name and where you're dialing in from today. So we've got Cynthia, obviously, from London, Nicola and Ian from Wyndham. Hi, we've got someone from Newcastle. That's a brilliant effort. Aylsham, hi, Megan. Corsten, London, brilliant. That's great. We've got people from all around. Bruce in Norwich. Hi, Bruce. Great. We're also just going to put into the chat bar as well the instructions for today's session if anyone needs to look back through them at all. So Nigel's just going to pop those into the chat bar as well. If I or any of the presenters today have any IT issues or connection issues at all, then please don't panic. We will try and resolve these as quickly and as smoothly as possible, but please do bear with us. And if things are really catastrophic, then we can always reschedule the event if it's absolutely necessary. We've allotted a couple of hours for this afternoon session, and we will try and wrap up by 6 p.m. So our first speaker today is Cynthia Co. Alongside her daily job as a diversity, inclusion and equality market researcher, Cynthia is also the co-founder of the Slow Fashion UK is also the co-founder of Slow Fashion UK and the campaign coordinator at the Slow Fashion Movement, which is a global initiative which seeks to inspire consumers and the fashion industry to slow down, to make things better and fairer in the process. So without further ado, over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Annie. Let me just share my screen right now. So, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. So, as Annie already said, my name is Cynthia, and I represent Slow Fashion Movement and Slow Fashion UK today. Today, I feel like it's a very special day to be doing a talk because obviously COP26 is happening right now. I've been looking at the program and there haven't been many events around fashion. And at the same time, today is also the Global Day of Action. So everyone around the world or many people around the world might have been protesting. So yes, thank you so much for joining me on this special day. I think these spaces are really important to create dialogue and to exchange knowledge because as Slow Fashion Movement, we really believe in the power of collective action to create a social tipping point, whether you're in the fashion industry or just a citizen that wants to do something more for the world. You know, there has to be a point where we can all do something so that slow fashion becomes a norm and fast fashion no longer exists. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what fast fashion is versus slow fashion. I'll be talking about fashion behavior because of my background in behavioral science. We'll look at the current fashion system together and whether the fast fashion industry is keeping up with what's needed to create a greener planet. And then we will also talk a little bit about what you can do to practice slow fashion. Before I go on and talk, I would love to do some interactive things here with you. So if you could go to menti.com or go to the link which I've shared on the chat, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think fast fashion is and what you think slow fashion entails. So if you just go to the site, you should see something like this. Let me just stop sharing for now. So all of your responses will be anonymous. And on the site, you can type some words that come to mind when you think about fast fashion. And if you put them in, then I should see them popping up on the screen. So we've got our first responses: fast fashion, superficial, waste, and disrespectful, exploitation, wastage, lots of waste, low wage. Couldn't agree more with all of these words. Keep them coming. Unethical for sure, both for the garment workers and the planet. It's cheap, which is probably why it's so unethical as well for the garment workers specifically. Disposable for sure when you look at all the trends that you are exposed to in social media, in magazines. That's why it's called fast fashion, and it's definitely bad for the planet. Would agree with that. Thank you so much for your responses. Keep them coming. Chemical, yes. So that's probably to do with the supply chain. So lots of our clothing requires chemicals to dye them, to process them. And that's what's putting harm to the environment as well. That's definitely a part of fast fashion culture as well. Let me just wait one more minute to see if anyone is adding more. If not, we'll just go to the next one. Okay, so let's think about slow fashion then. When you think about slow fashion, what comes to mind? think it's the same website for those who are having trouble accessing. So one person saying it's repairable, it's sustainable, and it's of better quality. All of that for sure, because when you have a more sustainable and higher quality piece of clothing, it should last longer. And that's why the keyword is slow here, isn't it? Thoughtful, visible mending, again, just to appreciate your clothes more, to have them in your wardrobe longer. Repairable and responsible for sure as well. There's justice, love that. Creative as well, yes, because you do have to get a little bit creative if you want to practice slow fashion and look differently all the time as well. Secondhand, that one in particular will be very interesting, given that our next speaker will be Karen, and she will talk a lot about her vintage experience. Fun, I'm glad that someone has said that. Usually people say sustainable fashion is boring, so let's see how fun slow fashion can get today. And it's natural, yes, a lot of organic handmade clothing as well. Probably ties back to one of your previous comments where fast fashion is associated with chemicals. And when you're doing slow fashion right, hopefully you would be using natural dyes and such as well, and organic materials. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's I hope that's made you think a little bit more about fast fashion versus slow fashion. And if I just go back to my slides now. So for me, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. For me, fast fashion is all about this Western concept post-industrial revolution, where we're mass producing and mass consuming a lot of clothes at low prices. And we're constantly chasing different trends. And because we're chasing these different trends, the clothes that are on the market, they are made to be disposable. They're made to be less long lasting. As a result, it's harmful for the environment and it's unethical towards garment workers as well. On the opposite side of that, you've got slow fashion. And for me, that's all about timeless design. It's about appreciating what you've already got and getting creative with what you've got as well. It's about producing fashion in a way that's timeless and it respects nature and garment workers. So hopefully I will inspire you to practice a little bit more slow fashion today. But I will also say that just because I'm talking here doesn't mean that I'm perfect in any means. So I'd be curious to know how many clothes you think I have in my wardrobe, and feel free to put a number in the chat. You can have a guess, and I promise I won't be offended. 50, 80, 60, 100, 80, 40, 100. I think you guys are very positive. 25. That's what I used to have when I just moved to London. And I didn't bring a lot of clothes with me. But when you look at my overall wardrobe, and this was 2 years ago, I've got 166 items of clothing. And that's probably increased a little bit over the last 2 years. And I was really shocked about that as well, if I'm being very honest, because I thought I'm a very ethical person. I rarely buy things. I don't care about fashion. Why would I have so much clothing? But apparently this is quite an average number of clothes. So when I interviewed a few different fashionistas and also talked about this with a fashion stylist, she was saying that especially fashion lovers, even eco-conscious ones, would have 300 to 600 pieces of clothing. And that just happens, especially when you get older. You know, you just accumulate these clothes year by year. And then you end up with a wardrobe like this. And that really made me think, because what's to love about fashion? It's something that I didn't understand for a long time, because I grew up disliking fashion and the social constructs that came with it. I didn't like how someone in advertisements or society in general thought I should dress a certain way and always look differently. I just really didn't like that. But then I realized it shows that I simply dislike fast fashion, chasing trends, having to adhere to someone else's image of beauty. But then I read this quote by Ursula de Castro from her latest book, and she's saying, fashion is by no means superficial. It delves deep, saying as much about who we are and the state of our civilization as it does about our personal tastes and our local traditions. And when you put fashion that way, it sounds much more meaningful, it sounds much deeper. And that's something that I found as well when I did my research around pro-environmental behavior in the fashion industry. We all love fashion for different reasons. I found there's two types of values. You could appreciate your clothing for the functional values, so the comfort that it gives you during winter, or the safety against cold weather. There's also the material value. Vintage is really booming right now, and it's almost becoming a second market where we as common citizens can also gain money by selling our clothing. But then on the other side, you've got these psychological values. So the frivolous side, so to speak, would be that we love clothing for the aesthetics of it. But it's much more deeper than that. We love the aesthetics of clothing because it helps us to build our self-identity. It helps us to express ourselves. It helps us to socially level ourselves in different situations. So when we're at work, we do differently than we do when we're attending a Christmas party. And like someone else said, it's also just a lot of fun. It can be a hobby. When you look at Instagram, there's a lot of people sharing their outfits of the days. People love to talk about how to mix and match, and it can be a really creative process. So, when we all reflect on these values, there's really nothing wrong with loving fashion. And I always thought that if we got the right values and a strong enough motivation, surely it should be easy to consume more ethically. But then, until I studied behavior science, I thought the only thing that stopped us from changing our behaviors was our motivation. But I found that there's so much more to it. Sure, motivation is one of the direct links to our behaviors, but there's also capability. So that's about the skills that you might have. Do you know how to mend something? Do you know how to mix and match your clothes in various ways? There's also the opportunity physically, the way our current fashion system looks like, including the amount of web shops and physical shops we have access to, and also the social opportunity that's associated with fashion behavior. So your environment may be putting the social standard on you to consume more or less. Advertisements keep giving us the social opportunity to consume more. So what I'm trying to say is motivation or values, they're really important. Our emotions that drive the desire to consume more or less clothing are very important. But it's also something about the system, our current fashion system. And that's why I think it's really important to talk about this as well, because many won't know how complex the fashion industry really is. It starts with choosing a fiber such as cotton, and you turn that into yarn, and you turn that into a fabric, piece of textile, which then gets dyed and assembled, then distributed. And then, after all of that, it ends in your closet where the use phase comes into play. And at the end of the day, or at the end of the season, people might dispose of their clothing. So there's so many steps in there. And the fashion industry doesn't really give us a choice right now to make ethical consumption very easy. Most of the clothing that's available is still incredibly polluting and wasteful, from fiber production to disposal. So when you just look at the greenhouse gas emissions during the dyeing and finishing phase, that's 28% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's also all the water that's used throughout the process. There's the chemical usage, as someone already mentioned before when we did the little word cloud. And then there's also waste creation. And when you've gone through all of that, you also realize that our clothes aren't disposed of properly. So annually, according to a study by EcoChain in 2019, 20% gets recycled. And this has to improve because in the UK alone, 140 million pounds worth of clothing goes to landfill every year. And globally, 500 billion US dollars is lost every year due to clothing underutilization and the lack of recycling. On top of that, more and more collections get released each year. So in this little graph on the left, you'll see that clothing sales have almost doubled. Whereas we as consumers also utilize our clothes less and less. It's almost halved over the last 10 years from 2000 to till now. And that all adds up to the greenhouse gas emissions, the water usage, the waste creation, and the toxic chemicals that are then that we then have to deal with as a planet. And I think part of why this is happening is because we are living in a linear economy right now. And that means that we take from the planet, we make something out of the products from the planet, and then we dispose of it. So let's think about how that then looks like in the journey of a pair of jeans. To produce a pair of jeans, we need to take some materials, usually some cotton from China or India. Then we go and make fabric out of the cotton, most likely somewhere in India or Bangladesh. And it takes a while before it arrives in the shops and then in your lab in the UK. And once we're done, we're disposing of the jeans, and apparently we're also not really recycling it as a system. So because of this, many brands are now talking about striving towards a more circular economy. And in an ideal world driven by a circular economy, these jeans would then be reused in some way, or its materials would be recycled. And this means that there is no disposal and that jeans are also produced in a sustainable way. Mind you, this is a very simplified model of the circular economy, but I just wanted to share this because for a long time, people didn't think that transitioning to a circular economy would be possible. They would blame consumers for not doing the right thing, or brands for not designing their products in a way that would allow for circularity. Then COVID came along, and COVID has proven to us that change is possible. So I recently read this article that in the year 2000, we've saved 900 tons worth of double-decker buses of clothing because pre-loved clothing items have been purchased more throughout the year, according to data from eBay. And that's really positive because there's been many negative associations with secondhand clothing or pre-loved clothes over the last few years, mostly around hygiene or people being concerned about how it might look to your social environment if you wore pre-loved clothes. And over the past few years, this perception seems to have shifted a bit. And the point is there's really no lack of consumer appetite for change. Now, many people might wonder, but is this just a one-time thing, or are we actually changing our behaviors? I'd really love to hear from you. Reflecting on your relationship with clothing over the last 1.5 years, how did your relationship change? So if you would like to go to Menti again, and I will share a link with you, so you can share with me where your relationship with clothes has changed. So I've got it up on the screen again. So if you're sharing your response there, it should pop up. And it doesn't have to be in a big way, but just thinking about how you were treating clothes. I'm sure that a lot of us have been appreciating how we can wear comfier clothes from working from home. And that's already a change during COVID-19 as well. So feel free to share. So someone is saying convenience, comfort, no more high heels. Yes, that's one of the most wonderful things ever. I don't know why high heels were ever invented because they're so uncomfortable. diverse, buying less, getting more creative. That makes a lot of sense. I feel like I've had so much more time to do some crocheting as well over lockdown. It's relaxing for sure. eBay, yes, I imagine because a lot of the physical shops haven't been open for a very long time. We've all been online shopping a little bit more. Some of us feel like we've been missing out, which makes sense. And that really brings me to the next question, because I'm wondering, what did you miss wearing the most during lockdown? Because at some point, these joggers, they are very comfortable. But for me, I really missed just wearing a dress or something, feeling like I'm putting some effort into my appearance. So party clothes, yes, boots, beloved red shoes, makeup for sure. Then I also wonder what's stopping us from wearing these clothes even at home. I've had many wonderful moments during lockdown, especially over Christmas, where just playing with my hair and putting on jewelry, because clothes are there for us as well, right? It's not just for the outside world. We can be beautiful whenever we want. Scarves, yes, I do love a good scarf as well. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Let me just go back to the presentation. So I think COVID has really given us an opportunity to reflect. And I strongly believe that the changes that we've made during COVID will continue. And it's not just me, it's also the stats saying that, because the secondhand market is really set to explode. When you look at 2019, how many clothes were traditionally thrifted or donated. And then when you look at the projections in 2024, it will all increase. So whilst we as consumers are changing, what is the fast fashion industry doing to keep up with this? What's holding the fast fashion industry back from changing the way in which they produce mass amounts of clothing in an unsustainable and unethical way? I think to answer that question, we really need to look at what the industry is like, or how it was in the past, in the present, and maybe in the future as well. I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about the supply chain, but I strongly believe that you don't really know what goes into your clothing when you see it before your eyes. And this summer, I had the pleasure of visiting a few factories in France. So I would like to show some videos with you. The first one was at the Textile Museum that showed us how clothes or textile was created back in the day when weaving was still a big practice. So let me just share that video. So for me, that was really eye-opening to see textiles being produced right in front of me. And then I visited a recycling facility. we talk a lot about recycling in the present fashion industry. So we keep mass producing and trying to find ways to reuse and recycle, but actually the technology isn't really there yet. So then that made me wonder, what would the fashion industry look like in the future? That's my last video. Let me just open it up though.
Again, like that. Here, a needle rise. Yeah. So this is diminution. La machine? Oui, ça s'appelle. C'est very cool.
Wow.
So that's a little atelier in France, around the Roubaix area. There they custom make clothes, and you can instantly let it get knitted like that. And that made me wonder, is that the future of slow fashion? Maybe custom made slow fashion only when we need it. So change has been slow, and I think there definitely has been some changes that were positive. But I'm wondering, is this going to be enough, even when we have these ready-to-make clothes, only when you need it? The way it's then made, the materials that we then use, and the frequency in which we demand these clothes will still impact whether we're putting harm to the planet or not. But thankfully, there are some industry-wide initiatives that are happening. In particular, in the UK, there's Textiles 2030, and that's basically an initiative with various stakeholders that are promising to reduce their impact by 2030. And the main targets are to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint by 50% and to reduce their water footprint by 30%. And the way they do that is by looking at the material choice of the products that they produce. So improve fibers, lower impact production processes as well, and lower carbon energy. But then there's also a lot around product design. So making clothes in a way that they have a longer life. And then, putting in some of these circular economy principles in there as well, encouraging reuse and recycle. And all of these actions, they have to come from the industry, but they also have to be paired with consumer action. So Textiles 2030 produced this little image where you can see the whole product life cycle of a garment. It starts with design and materials and manufacturing, but then when you get to use and donation and disposal, that's us as consumers, where we can make a difference. And these changes that are needed from the consumer, they need to be supported by a wider system. So that's why this initiative, I think, is going to be very pivotal. At the moment, when they just launched for 6 months, they had 92 signatories already, spanning from brands and retailers to manufacturing businesses to recycling businesses, and all of them are working together to reach those targets. 92 signatories doesn't sound like a lot, but apparently, according to Textiles 2030, this already represents 62% of all clothing put on the market in the UK. So just like with COP26, I suppose these sorts of initiatives, only time will tell whether we reach the target. In the meantime, there are some brands that are trying to be something different. If you think about fast fashion, for me, that was always Primark. Primark had a lot of cheap clothes, a lot of different clothes all the time. And recently they launched this Primark Cares initiative where they promise a lot around greenhouse gas emissions, recycling, the use of sustainable materials. And they report on this each year as well. And I was really impressed by how comprehensive these reports were. And I think that every step is important, but at the same time, I don't believe you can only rely on making your processes more environmentally friendly when at the same time you keep producing many clothes. So 2 days ago, I looked at their website just to see how many clothes they are selling right now. And they have 2,234 items right now. And who knows how many collections they produce every year. There's no disclosure of the overall amount of items made per year. And that's really not shocking, really, when you look at the stats again. Research by Fashion Revolution has found that only 14% of major brands disclose the overall quantity of products made annually. And this makes it really difficult to understand the scale of overproduction globally. In other words, even if a brand is fully circular, if this doesn't go hand in hand with a desire to slow down production and to stop releasing multiple collections a year, we still end up damaging our planet. And I think most of us would agree that we can't really afford that right now. That's why, other than making a difference through the clothing you buy, the most effective way to make a difference is to truly care about the clothes you already own and not buy anything new as long as you don't need it. And you can do that by making sure that your clothes last longer. So for me, it's all about washing with care, because I know that a lot of energy goes into our washing machines. When you look at our jeans, you don't have to wash them every week. If it's not underwear or sportswear, you can probably wash it on lower temperatures to save energy as well. But always check the label to be sure. If you wash it on a lower speed as well, it means that less microplastics will be shedded, meaning that your clothes will be a little bit more intact. And you can protect fragile clothes by washing them inside out or putting them in a special washing bag. All these little things really help to preserve the original quality of your clothes. Then related to that, you can also dry with care. So dryers are very energy intensive, but sometimes, accidents also happen. Dryers tend to shrink your clothes sometimes if you don't put them in the right settings. So why would you take that risk if you can also just dry it in the air? And it's probably also better for you because you have to pay less energy bills. And also you have to think about the different types of clothing you have. Wool is notorious for changing a little bit in shape, especially when you hang it. So instead of hanging your woolen clothes, you could also just lay it flat on your rack so it doesn't stretch. When it comes to storing, again, woolen things or sweaters may stretch, so you could also just fold them. And you have to think about moths as well. Use mothballs if you can, or other organic ways of keeping moths out of your closet. You can put them in a special bag so that they stay safe, especially some of our more precious clothes. And what I found very helpful, and something I've seen in my own research as well, is that switching up your wardrobe every half a year. So really looking at your wardrobe during winter and when you're changing to summer seasons, to then swap your clothes around, storing your summer clothes into your wardrobe and storing your winter clothes away. That really makes you appreciate your clothes better. When I asked people about it, they were saying sometimes they just forget what kind of clothes they have or how many clothes they have. And then every season, when they bring out that suitcase again, because it's time for that seasonal change, they're like, it feels like they're shopping in their own wardrobe again. It feels like they have new clothes all over again, even though they were still the old clothes. So I think some of these things could really empower you to make a difference. And it shows that as long as you use your clothes as long as possible, that's already the biggest thing that you can do for the environment. And the thing is, you don't have to do it all on your own as well. For example, this summer, I was on a fashion detox, which meant that for 3 months straight, I didn't buy any new clothes. And that sounds like not so much of a big deal because 3 months, that's not so difficult, is it? But then I had the wedding to attend, a 5-day wedding at that. It was a South Asian wedding, so I don't have any South Asian clothing. I was very grateful that I had friends around me that helped me with clothes, so they let me borrow some of their clothes. And also just the wider slow fashion movement community. There were more than 3,000 people joining me in this fashion detox. There's people like Karen, who's also a slow fashion ambassador, and she hasn't bought any new clothes for 20 years. That's really inspirational. Having this community really helps. The more people around you share the same values, the easier it is to be motivated and change your own behaviors. I also believe it's really important to keep learning from perspectives that aren't just centered in the global north, because fact is that it's mostly the global north which is driving this mass hysteria of consumption. And I think if you remember the quote I shared in the very beginning, clothes say something about our values and our local traditions. And I think we can really learn from the values and traditions of other countries as well. I've learned so much about other cultures and their fashion, and I've grown to appreciate non-fast fashion much more because I was exposed to all of these different kinds of slow fashion. Slow fashion, there's not one way of doing it because every culture is different. So I would really encourage you to find a community that fits you and where you can learn from. It doesn't have to be the slow fashion movement community. There's a lot of other resources that I use. I loved reading Loved Clothes Last. I haven't gone through it all yet, but the first 2-3 chapters were really inspiring already. Aja Barber, who is based in the UK, but who's actually from the US, she recently released this book called Consumed, which is looking at a more systemic way of how we got to our consumption patterns right now. And I would really recommend that as well. From books to podcasts to whole communities, there's so much to learn. These are some of the communities that I follow, such as Fashion Revolution, Remake, Eco Age, Global Fashion Exchange, and of course, Slow Fashion Movement and Slow Fashion UK. So there's a lot out there to learn. And I think that's what makes slow fashion so exciting, because you keep using your clothes, but you keep seeing them in a different way because you keep learning. So with that, I hope I have encouraged you to keep learning, to keep connecting with others around fashion. If you happen to be close to Manchester this month, feel free to join us for the Future Fashion Fair in Manchester, where Slow Fashion UK will host a panel discussion, and there will be many other talks and activities on the day as well. So feel free to join us. And I would like to say thank you so much for listening, for joining the interactive sessions. And if you're interested in joining our movement, please don't hesitate to connect. This is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I believe this is now the start of the Q&A. So Annie, if you could take over again, that would be great.
Brilliant, Cynthia. Thank you so much. That was fascinating and inspiring, and has made me think about looking at my own clothes cupboard and having a good old sort through things. But yeah, really, really interesting. We've got quite a few questions that have come through. I've got some up on my screen and I've written some down. So we've got quite a few questions that are talking about clothes once you've finished with them and what's the best thing to do with them. So we've got a question here that says, so where can you take clothes to be recycled if they're not kind of in a good enough condition to go to a charity shop or to a clothes bank? What would your advice be for people who've got clothes that, yeah, aren't quite in good enough condition?
So I believe that some brands have take back schemes, and it really depends on the brand, what kind of quality they accept. But hopefully, if they are preaching what they're saying, if they're really honest, they will be taking those clothes back and putting it back into their collections. So I would definitely encourage looking into that as well. When it comes to clothing that isn't really in a good condition anymore, you can always look at how you can use it in a different way. So I tend to shred up my clothes that are in a very bad condition, and then I make yarn out of it, and I make something else out of it, or I use it as pillow stuffing, because who doesn't like a good stuffed pillow? Or you can use it as a rag as well. but as long as they're in a good condition, rather than thinking about going to the charity shops, I would actually think about whether you can swap it. This piece of clothing that I'm wearing right now, it swaps. And what I love about swapping events is that you're really conscious about what goes in and out of your wardrobe. You never add something because you exchange one piece of clothing in your wardrobe for another one. And you can, when you make these human connections, I feel like there's a little bit more faith that they will be treated well, because there's been a lot of news around charity donations ending up in South Africa or somewhere else instead, because some of these clothes just don't end up being sold. So I would really recommend that if you can directly just sell it to someone else or gift it to someone else, and if they're in a really good condition, you would do that instead. I hope that answers your question.
And I've got one of my own questions, which is, so I buy a lot of secondhand clothing, but I would buy a typical fast fashion brand secondhand. So, you know, I would do that on eBay, or I'd do that in a charity shop. Does that count, or is that still kind of fueling that fast fashion industry? I suppose that's my question.
I think on a system level, it's really hard to tell, you know, because there's always going to be supply and demand. Some might think that if we keep buying secondhand fast fashion, then maybe fast fashion will never be inclined to stop producing so much because they know the secondhand market is booming. But at the same time, what are you going to do with those clothes that are already out there? Are you just not going to buy them? Are you just going to burn them? Which I think is even worse, not just because of the greenhouse gas emissions that you then cause from burning things, but also all of that hard work that went into these clothings, and to then not use them. I think that is very wasteful as well. So I would say, statistically speaking, I don't know the answer to that, but ethically speaking, I think if you give a piece of clothing a second life, that is always better than doing nothing with it.
Great, thank you. And I've got a question that I've written down here, which says, can most clothes be recycled? So can the majority of cloth fabrics actually be recycled?
The difficult thing around recycling is that, especially when they are blended textiles, so when it's not just purely cotton, it's cotton mixed with polyester, that gets really difficult. And that's why buying consciously, if you can, is really important, where you can buy clothes that are just 100% hemp, 100% cotton, even if cotton, you know, isn't, it's notorious for being very water intensive, but at least it biodegrades and it's recyclable compared to polyester blends. So I would say that it really depends on the facilities as well and the type of clothing that you're buying. If you want to buy clothes for making sure that they can be recycled, make sure that you have pure clothing that isn't a blend.
Great. And I suppose it's slightly on a similar vein, but we've got some questions coming in around like how to make clothes last longer. So I think you've touched on this a little bit. And I suppose I would just add into that is, do you have any tips for how to keep your white clothes white once you've washed them lots of times?
Yeah, I mean, definitely don't wash them with all of your other colored clothes. I've got some white towels and they just turn gray because I don't care about them. But if it's white clothes, I try to just save them up and wash them all together. There are some things, you know, I think there's some of these markers that you can use. If you stain your white clothes, you can rub it out as well, which you could consider, so that you don't have to wash every time you stain your white clothes, which always happens with me, by the way. So, so that's also something that you can do. But in terms of stopping it from yellowing, I'm not sure. I do know that some people tend to change the armpit pads that you sometimes find in clothing. So those turn very yellow very soon, because that's where you naturally sweat a lot. And if you can, in a way, put a patch there and those are changeable, then I think that would really help to keep your white clothes white for longer as well. But in general, I would say washing your clothes less makes them last longer, because every time you toss something in a washing machine, it just feels like it's getting attacked, and you know, all these fibers just disintegrate. You can also, sometimes you have these little cotton balls or something that appear on your clothing, and you can just use a shave eraser to take away those little balls as well. That works really well.
That's a really
yeah.
good tip, because you get that's like, especially in the winter with jumpers, it's just a nightmare, those little balls that you get all over them. But
exactly.
and it's interesting thing about washing your clothes, because I hadn't really thought about that, because as I said, I haven't bought new clothes for a long time, but I probably do wash my clothes quite a lot, and I haven't really thought about that as sort of one of the issues that really needs to be resolved. So I'm certainly going to try and do that less. And then I think probably just last question for you, Cynthia, before we move on to Karen, is how do I encourage others to move away from fast fashion industry? So if there are kind of, friends or family who sort of aren't interested, how would you encourage others to look to slow fashion?
I think the most inspirational thing is just really to wear your values, right? To really walk the walk and talk the talk. When you're passionate about slow fashion, show that in the clothes that you wear. Be proud when you repeat outfits. Be proud when you buy secondhand clothes and be like, this is vintage, this is pre-loved, and I don't mind because this is what matches my values. Being outspoken about that, I found that that's a much more inspirational way of making people change than giving them all the climate facts or the social worker facts and then bombarding people with a no, I know it better attitude. That's not what we as citizens or consumers, we should be in the same boat together. We should be inspiring each other through our actions, and nobody knows it all. Things change all the time. There's so much greenwashing happening as well. So it's really hard to know who knows it best. But as long as you keep preaching what you preach and through your actions, I think that's really inspirational. Once people get a little bit more acquainted with the problems around the fast fashion industry, they're usually keen to learn more anyway. So you really don't have to force that. Once they are open to it, you can suggest some accounts to follow on Instagram, for example, or some books or some podcasts. Really see what fits them, their way of learning. Not everybody is made to listen to a lecture around the fashion industry and get inspired by that. And also help people out, when they are having difficulties choosing what to wear for a new date or something. Just tell them, you know what, I've got this dress. I think it would fit you. Why don't you borrow it? And make it okay to borrow. I've got so many borrowed clothes and in my wardrobe, and I'm very happy for people to wear my clothes if they can fit in it. So I think normalizing all of this would really help people to be inspired and practice slow fashion in a way that they probably have already anyway. They just weren't aware of it. So if you emphasize it, then I think that would really help.
That's brilliant advice, and the great thing about slow fashion is it's something that we can all take part in, and so yeah, lovely advice there. And if you've got any Instagram accounts or anyone that you think is worth following, then feel free to pop them in the chat bar, Cynthia, if people here want to pick up on those. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. We are now going to move on to our next speaker for this afternoon, who is Karen Welton, aka Fabulous Miss K. Karen lives and works in Norwich as a vintage fashion stylist, lifestyle consultant, events manager, blogger and general vintage fashion veteran. Karen has had a lifelong passion for vintage fashion and has over 25 years experience in the fashion and beauty industry, and has worked with some of the biggest and brightest names, including Vivienne Westwood and Jean-Paul Gaultier. So Karen, over to you.
Okay, hello there. Well, thank you for having me. What I thought I would do first of all is just tell you a little bit about how I got into wearing vintage and secondhand fashion, and then I'll give you a few tips on how to start if you don't already do it, or different ways that you can actually start getting secondhand into your wardrobe. So I started wearing vintage and secondhand probably when I was about 14. And I'm now 57, so that's kind of quite a few years ago. So over 40 years, I've been wearing secondhand and vintage. I started wearing it because I wanted to be different from everybody else. I didn't want to wear what everybody else was wearing. Also, I've always loved fashion. I've always loved dressing up. So, and I wanted to wear what was in the Vogue magazine that I had a subscription to. But obviously I couldn't afford to buy the original designer pieces. So I started finding ways in secondhand shops and vintage shops that I could find my own way of interpreting the trends. So I do love the trends. I do love fashion. I do love being current. But over the years, I've actually learned more and more and more about how the fast fashion industry, that we've actually learned from Cynthia, how bad it is and how much it is actually polluting our planet. And so even more so now, and being part of the slow fashion movement, I've discovered how by wearing vintage and secondhand, we can actually help to save the planet. But very often people kind of think, well, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go to start buying secondhand fashion, and I'm not going to be fashionable. I'm not going to be current. But at the end of the day, there's only so many ways that you can reinvent a frock. You know, designers draw from the past all of the time. If you look at what's recently been on the runways, recently there was a, I don't know if anybody saw the Gucci show that was in LA. If you look at that, I mean, that is just so 70s, you know, and very 1930s. So there's no reason why you can't buy current trends, but buy the original inspiration. So what I also encourage people to do when I take people shopping, because that's what I do in Norfolk, I take people shopping, I help them to find ways to incorporate vintage and secondhand into their wardrobe. So and also, like Cynthia was saying, you know, actually go into your wardrobe and find what you've already got. You know, if you actually think about it, we've got so many clothes. It's like Cynthia said, she's got over 100 pieces in her wardrobe. I don't know how many pieces I've got in my wardrobe. I've never really counted, but I've got an awful lot of clothes. So very often I can look at what I've already got and find ways of creating new outfits and creating new trends from something that I've already got. So what I would do is, and what I tend to do as well is I have a little mood board. So I will find, I have a little mood board either on Pinterest or I save it on my phone of outfits that I love and outfits that maybe designers have produced or fashion houses have produced. And then what I do, I will go and have a little look in my wardrobe and go, okay, fine, what have I got that looks similar? What have I got that I can maybe create something with to give myself a little look that that is similar? And the fun thing about shopping secondhand is that you actually never know what you're going to find. So that for me is the thrill of it. You know, you're not going to go into a big high street store and just pull something simple off the rack. It takes a lot more time to find things. It's a lot more fun, and you're never going to turn up to a party in the same dress that somebody else has already got. So that is what makes it much more fun for me. That's what makes it enjoyable. Yes, it takes a little bit more time, and yes, you can't always get the sizing. But one thing that I would advise you to do if you are buying secondhand and vintage is to get to know a really good seamstress, because they can work wonders. Or if you want to do it yourself, there are loads of classes, and lots of people do courses that you can actually learn how to alter things. So, you know, just because it's not a perfect fit, don't worry about it, because you can change it, you can get it altered, you can, you know, make it fit. When you are going secondhand shopping, and especially vintage shopping, one thing that I would actually say as well is don't look at the sizing. know your measurements. So write your measurements down. So your bust, your waist, your hips. So they're the key ones that you need, because vintage sizing is completely different from today. So because we have this thing now where you can go into one shop and you will be one size, you'll go into another shop and you'll be a completely different size. So I would say when you are shopping, especially for vintage, is know your measurements and take a tape measure with you, because then that way you can actually measure and you can see whether it's going to fit. Another really good tip as well, especially buying vintage and secondhand in general, is to actually hold it up to the light, because that way you can actually see whether there are any flaws, how the fabric is, and whether there's any little holes in the fabric. But as Cynthia was saying, you know, don't be put off by buying something if it has, especially with vintage, if it has a little hole or a little pinprick or a little mark, because these things can easily be fixed. You can either take them to a seamstress or you can do them yourself. So, you know, don't be put off by any little marks or holes or anything like that, because apart from anything else, it adds to the character as far as I'm concerned. And what you will always get with vintage is much, much better quality fabric. If you look at, I mean, even from the 80s, I mean, I've got amazing pieces of vintage wool suiting in my wardrobe, and the quality of the fabric and of the wools are just so much better than you would actually buy now. And so if you actually bought that quality from the high street now, you would be paying, you know, designer price, you'd be paying a lot higher prices. So that's what you get with vintage. You get something that's different, you get something that is much more fun and much more individual, and it allows you to create your own way of styling things up. So I mean, basically, I haven't got, you know, this is kind of how I like to shop. I like to shop slowly. I like to wait until the perfect piece comes up. I like to play in my wardrobe. And I was also, and as they said, I actually live in Norwich, and we are really, really lucky in Norwich that we have a vast vintage selection here. We've got lots of charity shops. We've got lots of vintage shops in Norwich and Norfolk. But what I do as well, whenever I go away, whenever I go and stay somewhere, whenever I go on holiday, I always do some research. So I will have a little list of where the charity shops are, of where the vintage shops are, of where all the pre-loved shops are, of the so I can actually go and have a little look and see what's around and see what I can buy. Another great tip as well is if you have vintage shops that are nearby, get to know your vintage sellers, because then they will start to find pieces for you. They will help you, you know, choose pieces, and then, you know, you will actually start to build a little wardrobe of a diverse wardrobe. So I mean, I haven't got a little presentation or things to show you, but what I want you to just do is think a little bit about how you shop and where you shop, and encourage you to think a lot more about buying secondhand and vintage, because it is a much more fun way to shop. It is a much more individual way to shop, and you can create your own style. So I mean, you can follow me on Instagram, where I will share all of my outfits of today, how I will repeat outfits, and how I will put little videos up there and show you how you can use pieces. So, you know, if you want to follow me and kind of so you can see how I create our outfits, you can message me on there. You can, you know, I do shop your wardrobes. So at the moment I'm working on trying to do it virtually, so I can help you create outfits from your own wardrobe. But a big tip I would say, it's like Cynthia said, it's really good to go into your wardrobe ever so once in a while and start playing with things. If you just pull them out and try on one jacket with lots of different pieces, or when you pack your summer wardrobe away and then bring out your winter wardrobe, have a look at it, and instead of just putting it straight into the wardrobe, have a little play with it. See how many outfits you can create. You know, play with different bits and layer things up. So can you get your summer dresses and put a polo neck underneath it? Can you add a scarf? Can you play around with bits of jewelry? So spend time playing and enjoying creating outfits from your wardrobe, and that way you will be able to make your wardrobe work for you, and so you won't think, oh, I haven't got anything to wear, let me go out and buy something new. So by using your wardrobe and by utilizing your wardrobe a lot more, you won't feel that need to actually have to go out and spend more money. Another thing I do in my wardrobe as well, if I've got suits, so I've got a trouser suit or a skirt suit, I actually separate them out. So instead of hanging them in the wardrobe as a suit, I will put the jacket with my jackets, I'll put the skirt with my skirts, or I'll put the trousers with my trousers. And then that way you tend to use those pieces as individuals rather than, oh, I can only wear that as a suit. And think about things as well. Don't use clothes for best. I've got some fabulous little sequins. I've got, you know, we were talking about what we missed over lockdown was not being able to wear our party frocks and stuff. Well, who says that you can't wear sequins during the daytime? Who says that you can't wear a glittery jacket over your jeans? Who says you can't wear a pair of glittery shoes with your jeans? So, you know, think about how you're wearing your clothes and think about using them a lot more, rather than, you know, keeping these stuff for best. You know, just use your wardrobe and play with it, and start to think about how you shop and where and the next time you think about buying something new, have a little think and say, one, have I got something similar in my wardrobe? And two, can I get this secondhand or can I buy it vintage? That's what I mean, I love shopping and I love walking around, having a look in the local department stores and things. But 9 times out of 10, when I walk in, I think, oh, do I actually want to buy that new, or can I buy it vintage? Can I buy it secondhand? As I was saying to the girls earlier, I probably haven't bought anything new apart from underwear or maybe tights and maybe the odd pair of shoes. I actually haven't bought anything new for over 20 years. I really, every time I go out shopping, I kind of think, right, can I buy it secondhand and can I buy it vintage? So always my first port of call is my own wardrobe. My second port of call is, can I buy it vintage or secondhand? So that's probably kind of what I wanted to say. I mean, I could waffle for ages about buying secondhand and you know, how to do it and things like that. But you know, I'll kind of throw it open to the floor and say, has anybody got any questions about how to buy secondhand, where to shop, what to buy, things like that? So yeah, I'll hand it back to you, Annie, and sort of, you know, any questions about shopping secondhand or about what I do or things like that.
Yeah, that's great. And I've just written that down because that's absolutely stellar advice. So have I got something similar? Could I buy this vintage or secondhand? I think that they're 2 really great pillars to live your slow fashion life by. So thank you for that, Karen. Okay, we've got a brilliant question here actually that's come in, and it says, I'm just going to read it out. So do you have any tips for shopping at transitional periods in your life, for example, pregnancy or weight fluctuations? And there's a question after that. So I'll move on to that question afterwards, but I'll let you answer that one first.
Okay, I mean, weight fluctuation. I'm a woman in my 50s who's going through the menopause, so my weight at the moment is going up and down, whatever. So what I would tend to do is I kind of have things. The good thing, I have things that are kind of varying sizes. So I buy things because I love them. I don't tend to look at the size label. So very often I've got some really great kind of vintage dresses that are kind of quite full and quite voluminous. And when I'm at my slimmest, I wear them and I tie them up with a belt and I cinch them in. When I'm at my biggest, I wear them as they are kind of full and kind of slightly more voluminous. So as I say, I will tend to buy varying sizes, and because that's kind of what you do when you shop secondhand, because you obviously can't go and buy your size. So that's probably what I would say is kind of don't worry about the sizing. Just buy it because you love it. And also as well, what I do, I've got a lot of vintage brooches and things. So again, what I will do, if I've got something that I've bought because I love it and it's a bigger size, I will just get a brooch and cinch it in. So then I can make it smaller when I'm at my smallest. But then I can have it bigger when I'm bigger. And also go, stretchy fabrics are really good as well. There's, a lot of the 80s stuff, some really great stretch in them that you can do when you're pregnant. And also don't forget about especially with pregnancy as well, don't forget about the boys stuff. Recently I've started wearing my husband's old Paul Smith suit that he bought years ago, which is a little bit big on me, but I pull it in with a belt. But that's the great way for pregnant women as well, is go and buy a man's suit or something. The trousers are very often bigger, but again, you can cinch them with a belt if you want to, and then wear them afterwards with a belt, wear them when you're pregnant and that kind of thing. So it's not worrying about sizing and just thinking about how it works and playing with it and cinching it in. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that I've sort of noticed post-COVID is that actually lots of people are wearing more comfortable clothes, and I've started wearing my husband's Levi jacket, which I'm not sure that he's delighted about. But yeah, I have seen that lots of people are kind of getting.
You can actually, it's kind of the norm now that you can go out in your tracksuit bottoms.
Yeah.
But if you want to dress them up and make them a bit more stylish, throw over a jacket or add in, a string of pearls or something. So it is a lot more about comfort these days. So, but you can dress it up and have fun with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's, some of what Cynthia was talking about as well, is allowing yourself to be creative and not sort of being stuck to things that are just in the shop at that moment and that time. So Karen, I've got quite a few questions that have come in here about your recommendations in Norfolk and in Norwich. So we've got one saying any hidden gems in Norwich, and another question about favourite recommendations for shopping in Norwich. I would also say if you've got any tips for North Norfolk as well, then that would be brilliant.
Okay, there are, I say we are really lucky in Norwich. You've got Sue Ryder Vintage, which is fantastic. You have got, which is one of my favourite places, a lot of my pieces come from there. Retreat Vintage on Magnum Street are fantastic. They have some really, really good stuff. There's now a new shop. If anybody that knows Norwich, you have got St Augustine's, which is now a really cool place to shop, and there's a fantastic little shop that's just opened on there called Jubilee. That is a little gem. There's also, if you want pre-loved and if you do love your designer, there's a fantastic shop that's opened in Reefham called the Dial House. And they have got the most incredible pieces in there. And they've just got a new manageress who is a really, really great stylist as well. So they've got pieces in there. Suffolk, a little bit further out, but it's worth having a day trip, is there's a place called East Coast Portobello in Halesworth. She has the most incredible piece. I mean, she used to have a place on Portobello Market. And so she has got some incredible pieces as well. So they are a few little hidden gems. But also, like I said before, it's when you research a little bit, and places in North Norfolk, Sheringham and Holt have got some great charity shops. It's always quite good to go to charity shops in a slightly more affluent area, because you do tend to get some kind of slightly higher end pieces sometimes. So I always recommend doing research before you go. But there's some great places in Sheringham and Holt as well that are really good for buying secondhand.
Brilliant, thank you. This is a slightly an interesting question, which is, do you think that a life in vintage clothing has cost you more than a life of buying high street clothes?
I don't know. Maybe because true vintage, I've got a lot of 30s and 40s pieces in my wardrobe that I've bought over the years, which are not cheap anymore, but then they are kind of 70, 80 years old. Vintage doesn't necessarily mean cheap, because, as I said before, the quality of the fabric is so much better than now. And so if you were buying the equivalent of some of the quality of the vintage pieces that I have collected over the years, I would say no, it's probably cheaper, because if I was buying the equivalent now, I would be having to buy high-end designer fashion, because the quality has changed so much. So I probably saved money in the long run by getting better quality pieces at a more reasonable price, because if I bought the equivalent now, I would have to spend a lot more money on it.
I suppose the other thing is there's probably lots of resale value on some of your vintage clothes as well, which often you won't necessarily get that with high street clothing. So yeah.
Exactly. Because I've got 1940s suits that probably look as good as when I bought, the day they were made.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that. And then probably this is, I suppose, a slightly trickier question, but it's an interesting one, which is how can buying vintage or secondhand fashion be accessible for people who've got sort of busy families, or people who are working full time, or for those people who've got limited time? And that's actually something I have heard. I've heard people say, oh, I don't have time for that. I haven't got the time to do this. What would your advice be on that?
There's places like eBay and Etsy and online sites and things. Yes, it takes a little bit more time to find it, but if you haven't got time to trawl around the shops, then that's a really good way of doing it. I've got a bit of a thing for Chanel-esque boucle jackets. So what I've done, I've actually set up on eBay, I've actually set up an alarm, or what it will actually do, it will actually tell me when pieces like boucle jackets and things like that are actually coming up, and when they actually come up on eBay, then it will actually email me. So I've set up an alert, it will actually email me, so when I have a look at the email, I can actually go through, and then I can have a little look. So that's a really good way of doing it. If you're looking for something specific, you can actually set up an alert on eBay, and it will then let you know when these pieces are coming up, and then you can kind of look at them all in one go and then put on a bid. You can also you can actually schedule bids as well. So if you can't, obviously not everybody can kind of wait for the perfect time to bid, you can actually do that as well. So you can set up a bid, and then it will bid for you at a certain time once it gets to you know, so you can do it that way. So that's a good way of doing it.
I actually did that today with for a Christmas jumper. We have an annual Christmas jumper ham and pickled onion party, though most of us are vegetarian now, but I bought a new jumper for that today on eBay, and that was scheduled in. But yeah, so that's a brilliant tip. I think we've probably run through most of the questions that we've had come in. I don't know, Karen, if you've got any sort of last little pearls of wisdom before we close the session off for today.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think, well, actually, I've just actually looked over because I'm actually sitting in my office here. I will just turn that around. Oh, excuse my mannequin there. Yeah. On my notice board, it's actually a quote from Vivian, who I worked with many years ago, and it says, choose well, buy less. So that's what I would probably say to people. Think what you're buying and buy less of it.
Brilliant. That's wonderful, and I think that ending with a Vivian Westwood quote is a brilliant way to finish off the session this afternoon. I would like to say a huge thank you to Cynthia and to Karen for joining us this afternoon. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure you've given lots of people food for thought, but also things that are applicable and that are kind of within the reaches of just our everyday lives to apply. So thank you so much for your inspiration and for your wisdom. I keep doing shameless plugs, but I'm just going to do another one. We've got another week's worth of events as part of our Greenbuild event. My colleague Nige, I think he's going to post the Eventbrite listing in the chat bar. So if anyone wants to sign up to any other events, then please do. We'd be delighted for you to join us. And yeah, before I go, just a very quick, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely rest of your evenings. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.